G'day, and welcome to the Island Podcast with your host, Matthew Siclosi. Today, I got a really great guest here, the first American on our show. Someone who actually prepared to talk about things today. So, that's a first for the show, too. Kaitlyn Cook, someone I met while I was studying abroad in England.
I wouldn't really say I prepared, but thank you. Keep your expectations low, everyone.
That's a good motto for the podcast in general. Just keep those expectations like not saying like don't have expectations, but just middle of the road. Come on. No.
Oh yeah, keep them low. We met in England when we studied abroad together, and we've kept in pretty good contact. And just a little more about me and my quote unquote qualifications here. I was a history major. I just graduated pre-COVID. I was a history major. That's pretty much all I'm qualified.
Yeah. For. You have your Bachelor of Arts, right?
Right.
Right, yeah, okay.
And I just do history as a hobby. It's just something I like to learn about for fun. Yeah.
So, as Kaitlyn, she actually prepared and did research and looked for talking points and something. She wanted to talk about the current situation with the riots and such in the United States. As we know, this is an ongoing issue, but it definitely has, it has its origins in American history.
Right. And so my topic points, they're all in my head, so bear with me on that. But my research is just, some tabs open. I just Googled some timelines, and I really want to mention that what I'm going to say is I don't want to mention any of my opinions. I don't think that's my place. All I really plan on talking about is the history behind the Black Lives Matter movement and like the significance of it today. Specifically talking about like social media, and then I also wanted to get into your opinion, your international Canadian opinion of what's going on, because I think that would also be pretty important for our viewers to know.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay. Well, first let's start off. Let me know what the world. What have you seen? What has Canada seen ever since, last month with the I Can't Breathe movement and everything?
So I don't know, at least speaking for me personally, what I saw is definitely in the case relating specifically to George Floyd is we definitely saw an act of police overreach, assault on a citizen by a law enforcement officer, and murder. Like that's what I saw when that happened. And I think, and again, this is my personal opinion.
No.
I think that, the tensions not only having to do with the racial issues in regards to organizations like Black Lives Matter, I think also the being all wrapped up in what's going on with COVID, everything it was just that perfect storm of everything coming together at once. And then that's why everything erupted as it did.
That makes a lot of sense, especially with then you mentioned COVID and everyone's been, locked up. So like to say, and people definitely, I did kind of feel that or sense that where people have an opportunity where they can, get a lot of their feelings out. So I do agree that, COVID did have an impactful influence.
Mm-hmm.
Did you guys see anything like in your social media about, the George Floyd movement?
Oh, for sure. Like that was pretty much immediate. Like I think something that Americans don't realize about the rest of us at large, or Canada in particular, I can't speak about the rest, is that like 80% of us live within, I think it's like 80 miles of the American border. So like we're deeply ingrained in your culture, your news, like everything that's going on. Like I know people, and like people in my own family, like they watch the news 24/7 to look at what's happening, what's been going on in the States for the past 4 or 5 years. Because just how nonsensical and tragically comedic it is.
I mean, to me, that's really impressive, though, because, I mean, where I'm from, I'm Midwest. I'm not even near Chicago, not even near the Canadian border, or any other border, for that matter. But just seeing, like, an outside news that's pretty cool that, you keep up with that. To be honest, I don't really even keep up with our news. So.
And that's the other thing too, is like I think like the town where I'm from, Sault Ste. Marie specifically, is a border town. So there's a town just on another side of a river, Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, that's American, and they barely acknowledge that we're there. I mean, I think they rarely even acknowledge that there is news that happens on the northern side of their border. Go and you drive, say 50 miles into Michigan from Sault Ste. Marie, and Canada's a distant thought, if anything.
I guess I will throw out one opinion.
Okay. No, go ahead. Like, I mean, yes, I don't think you should restrict yourself and not bring up your own opinions. I mean, that's largely what this is.
Right. That's true. Well, I think, in my opinion, most Americans really do kind of ignore the national spectrum, like the national news, unless it, pertains directly to them.
Right.
Me included.
Yeah.
I am the worst at watching news, mostly because I just find it depressing. I know that's probably not.
But I mean that is valid. Like, especially nowadays, is like why would you, unless you're some sort of sadomasochist, why would you continue to watch something that causes you mental anguish?
Right. Well, with like the recent social media and like with the BLM movement, I did try to keep up with it, mostly because I respect the movement a lot, but also I found it fascinating to compare it to a lot of what happened in previous history, because to me, what happened with George Floyd, that was not the first time an African American male had been even murdered by the police. Right. Like, that was not the first time, and I'm sure it's not gonna be the last time, but it was the first time, and this is why I think the George Floyd movement was so powerful. It was the first time that somebody recorded it on their own cell phone, and then they were able to broadcast that, and then it just it just grew and grew and grew.
Well, was it the first time that it's been recorded? Because I'm pretty sure there's been other recordings. I think this is the first time where it's been so clear cut.
Yes, it's been so clear cut, and there's been other recordings of police cameras and everything.
Right.
But I mean, again, that's the police, and I'm not saying down with the police, because I definitely I agree that we do need a police force. Right. I do agree with redirecting a lot of the funds for the police.
And now, see, that's, I think, a difference between, again, Canadians and Americans. I'm seeing a lot of Canadians, and especially Canadians on our left spectrum, who are saying, no, completely get rid of the police. And I would say that, me personally, I'm more in line with your views there.
I mean, I think there should be more community outreach, more access to healthcare.
The one thing I would say is definitely more mental health training.
Oh, definitely.
How and de-escalation training. I think if you look at what's actually being trained and what's actually being reinforced in a lot of these police training programs, is that they're not getting enough of these non-violent ways to de-escalate the situation. And I mean that is for a plethora of reasons, especially when you're dealing in the States. And I think, again, one of the biggest things in the States too is that you have your Second Amendment, and every interaction where it's bad enough, here in Canada, you pull someone over, you don't know what's going on, what they might have in their vehicle with them. In the States, it's every potential interaction a possible suspect could be armed with a firearm.
Right.
So
here's another opinion.
right. Yeah.
I find the Second Amendment to be, like, I understand why, the founding fathers, put that in place and everything. But I think to this point, it's a bag of worms that cannot be closed.
Right.
Like, we are too far down the rabbit hole that, unfortunately, no matter how many gun laws we have, I don't really believe it's ever going to get better. I mean, there's so many illegal firearms, and there's so many ways that people can get around the system. And unfortunately, people abuse the system. And so I personally would never carry a gun. I don't feel comfortable. I as an American, I do honestly, like, there were days when I went to school and I thought to myself, I could get shot today.
Yeah.
I could walk out of school and get shot.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it is a concern, I think, for me. And I don't know if, other students feel that, or teachers, but I mean, and then the whole people, defending their right and everything, I totally, you got to do what you got to do.
Yeah. That's the thing, I guess. I don't know. It's a tough situation, and it's one of those things where there's no right and no immediate answer.
Right.
How to turn that specific problem around.
Right. Because, I mean, what if George Floyd, what if he did have a gun and he shot the police officer? That would have been a whole other movement.
Right. Right. And that's the thing, too. And it's hard to.
Or, I mean, what if a bystander who saw George, saw the situation, shot the police officer rather than George Floyd? And then what if it was, a white guy who shot it? I mean, there's a million different ways it could have gone.
Right. And again, this is the nature of the American system and the American culture is. And yeah, you don't know the repercussions that could come out from a situation like that, and it's terrible. Not to pivot from George Floyd, but I'm sure you know the case of Breonna Taylor too. What happened with that? Where they issued a no-knock warrant to the wrong address, and the criminal that they were looking for was already in jail. So it wasn't even like they needed to execute this warrant. She was shot and killed while she was asleep, and then her boyfriend was arrested for firing back at the cops.
Right, but he was just defending himself.
Right, and this is and this is the reason why a lot of these pro-Second Amendment people would say that you should have a gun for government encroachment like this. But when the situation happens, because it's a racially charged situation, these pro-Second Amendment people also tending to be racist.
Yeah,
they flip to the other side that, oh no, he shouldn't have fired back in that situation, even though he's I'm not sure if he was asleep too or not, but still being rudely awakened, having your partner shot to death and then being fired upon. I think it's only natural that anybody in that situation would, if they had a gun, fire back.
Right. I mean, I really do think that, especially for the police force, they should be not de-armed, but like less armed. Like, there should be more restrictions.
Well, the difference between de-arming the police and demilitarizing the police is that, again, there is this problem in the United States where that there's certain police departments that they get these overbloated budgets, and then they're able to go out and purchase things like essentially armored personnel carriers and military grade weapons, and especially if you're not in one of these larger cities like maybe Chicago or New York or LA, where that should not be equipment that a police force has to equip themselves with.
Right. And so you don't need, like you said, unless you're in like Chicago or New York or something, if you're like a small town, you really probably don't need so many, like as much as like what they have. And I'm saying that, like, maybe keep the budget the same, that's totally fine, but yeah, have counseling, have
reorganize and better allocate your funds.
Right. And like, I definitely, like, want to make sure that, you know, the police officers, that they feel safe also, that
Right.
they feel listened to, because they are trying to do their job. And it's a broken system that
Mhm.
now is just not, maybe not even now, but it's becoming addressed, and we have the opportunity to fix it and make it better. It's not going to be perfect, but as long as we
No.
just continually try to make it better, and we could do it.
Right. And something else that I heard discussed that I think would be beneficial to implement is a national registry of bad actors. So when you do have a police officer who, like the ones involved in the George Floyd incident, or you know, any sort of incident where they're found to be criminally at fault for actions that they take on the job, that they're put into this registry, so they can't just, so say if they do get let go from their job, they just can't go to the next state or the next town and be hired
Right.
by another police force. And then that
Right.
police force, when something else happens, they can go, oh, well, we didn't know. There's no way we could have known.
Right. And that makes total sense. I mean, sex offenders,
Right. Yeah.
same thing.
Yeah.
You know, like it's all public access, you know. I think that should, yeah,
Yeah.
that would be great.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's just talking about the police and everything. I guess going back to what like I said, what I was first surprised about was how impactful the George Floyd, you know, what happened, how impactful just that event was in sparking this, I would say, rebirth of a movement. Because it really is. Because, like I said, there's been other events where, I mean, Black, like, African American males and females have been, you know, subjected to police brutality. This is not new, and I don't know if a lot of the public who hadn't witnessed this before thought this was something new, but it really wasn't, and it never really ended.
And I think that's another thing to talk about, that there is a disconnect in the United States, where there's a lot of these kind of right-leaning Americans who just don't even seem to grasp that these people have had different experiences than them. They can't even fathom that they did not live the same childhood that they did. And they think that they almost choose these positions that disadvantage them.
Oh, I totally agree. I mean, I remember just in one of my classes, we just looked at, like, why statistically African Americans live in, like, poverty, and why that is. And I think a lot of, especially, like, non-African Americans look at it as, oh, well, you know, they're just lazy, or they just, you know, try, or they don't go to school, they don't, you know, increase their education. That's just statistically. But really, what happened was they were never ever given, like, the fair opportunity that like most Americans have, because ever since slavery, like, even when they got out of slavery, they were still not given at all the same opportunity, especially in the South, where there was still I can't think of the name right now, but not endangered like farming, but like it's farming.
What
It's like
there's was it sharecropping? Is that
sharecropping? They were sharecropping, and they still didn't get fair wages. They still didn't get fair jobs, even into the 19th century. I mean, the 1900s, they still didn't. I mean, up until what, 1960s?
And even then, that was just when they LBJ passed the Civil Rights Bill, and they're actually given proper rights that they should have had in the first place. No, what happened was, after the Civil War and Lincoln was assassinated, it was the last time where you really had a president and a vice president who were of different political parties. So Andrew Johnson, as vice president, who then took power, was a Democrat, and a Democrat from the South. And to appease and try and keep, you know, the country to fall into more disarray and dissension in the post-Civil War period, he allowed these Jim Crow laws to go into place. And this is what really restricted Black Americans from not only getting, you know, some form of reparations, but, you know, being able to move into different neighborhoods and accumulate wealth and the land that would allow them to be on par with other racial groups of their time.
Right. I mean, they were never given like a fair advantage at education and the job market, but yet still you see a lot of African Americans excel, which is just fascinating, and that just shows how strong-willed, you know, they were. But you just see how much they had to overcome.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
yeah, and I mean that
autobiographies you can read,
right.
and you're just like, how?
But it's
in the world
it's not.
can you do that?
See, the thing with that is that it's not they achieved what they achieved in spite of the conditions that they were relegated to.
Right.
And that's the problem, is that they had hurdles put in their place. Whereas, not to say that there weren't hurdles in other people's place, but they had hurdles that were specifically put there by laws and regulations, trying to
systematic racism.
Yeah. So and then it's unfortunate that you have situations like the massacre of Black Wall Street in Oklahoma, and so in the 1920s, and I'm not 100% on this, there was it Tulsa or was it Oklahoma City?
You want me to look it up?
Yeah, if you don't mind. It was a district of I forget which city, but in Oklahoma that had become a center of African Americans who had accumulated wealth, who were able to accumulate wealth and open their own businesses, and they had done fairly well for themselves in that area, and and created a community that supported each other. Then I believe there was an incident between something of like an Emmett Till situation, and of course the white authorities used that as their reasoning to go in and essentially, I think they started with mass rats, but they eventually did start killing people in the community, and it became a massacre.
Yeah, I'm reading about it now. It is Tulsa, and it was very similar, like you said, the Emmett Till situation, where just a young Black man, his name was Dick Rowland, was riding in an elevator with a white woman, and then the accounts differ, what happens. Also, right. Very similar to Emmett Till, and then the Tulsa police arrested Rowland the following day, and it was just, then there was a confrontation between black and white armed mobs around the courthouse, and yes, I'm trying to read more. Oh, and this is kind of interesting, actually. It says Greenwood which is where this all happened.
Right.
Greenwood was looted and burned by white rioters, which a lot of people, especially, through social media right now, one of the big controversy is the African Americans who were looting and rioting. A lot of whites were saying, "Oh, that's not how you protest. That's not appropriate," and all this, but 1921, almost 100 years ago, it was whites who were looting and burning and rioting. So, right.
And then this was a discussion that, not that I want to condone violence, like I want to be perfectly clear here. I purposely on the episode with Jared did not tell anybody how to make napalm for a certain reason, but I had this discussion a few days ago with somebody, in that there's a lot of people who now, I don't know if you've seen like online or on social media, is people who are they're putting forth Martin Luther King, and these largely people on the right, and you say, "Oh, that's how you do a protest. This person achieved great things while peaceful protesting." And the thing is that these people don't seem to understand is that the only reason why the establishment kind of sided with Martin Luther King is because there was his counterpart in Malcolm X. Okay, he was he was the more peaceful of the violent radical option.
Right. But also looking at Martin Luther King, there were so many instances where he was subjected to violence because of whites.
Right. Yeah, and that too. But and that actually goes to prove my point, that I made last night, and I'll make now, is that if it was just Martin Luther King, they'd be showing him just as much violence as they did Malcolm X and the Black Panthers, and that they're showing the protesters now.
So, I mean, I don't know. It's just a lot of this and that. And I think that a lot of this is due in part to the failure of the American education system.
Yeah.
Especially in history, because a lot of this, like, it's not taught.
Mm-hmm.
Even, like, throughout grade school and whatnot. I remember learning about slavery, but not really addressing it. I guess you learn facts and you learn about, Abraham Lincoln set the slaves free.
Right.
But you don't really learn about the horrors about slavery, especially the aftermath. You really don't learn about the aftermath. You pretty much just be like, oh, so they were freed and they were, lived fine. But that's not true at all.
Right. And I think that
college.
That early Jim Crow era is probably one of the most important aspects to learn about, because it is why the United States is in the situation it is right now.
Exactly. And I honestly don't remember really learning about Jim Crow laws. I remember learning about in 4th grade when we watched videos, but that was really much more civil rights movement era. It wasn't right after the Civil War. I don't remember really learning about what happens after the Civil War until my college level classes.
Yeah.
And even then, I was specifically focused, on that. Oh, I remember now. Okay, one thing that I really think should be taught in American education early, when you're learning about the Civil War or slavery, slave narratives. I don't think slave narratives are addressed enough, and I think that is where you can really learn the most. It's a primary source, and that's where you really learn empathy.
Right. Yeah.
You read their story, and I think that is a great way to honor them.
Right.
And I just took my last class, my senior capstone, I guess, it was about slave narratives, and I had never read one until then.
No.
And
yeah, no, it can be eye-opening and just horrific to read and realize what these people went through.
Right. And I think it should be a requirement. I think every American should read.
And that's one thing, to bring in a personal example, and we talked about this a little bit in the last episode, but we didn't really expand on it, I think. So the university that I went to, Algoma University in Sault Ste. Marie, it was what's called in Canada a residential school. So what that means is that a religious organization connected with residential schools, so it could either be the Catholic Church or a Protestant church. There's different ones who would be associated with the school. They would go into an Aboriginal reserve and they'd forcibly take Aboriginal children away from their parents to a school, usually one, even if there was one close by, they would take them to one farther away to forcibly, have that connect or that disconnection, that removal from the home community, and then they would try and force assimilation and their education on these kids. And above and beyond that, they would treat them brutally, to the point where there was a lot of child abuse and murder that happened essentially at these schools. And even if, say, you were lucky enough to survive this school, then you're scarred for life mentally. And it's caused a lot of problems generationally in the Canadian Aboriginal community. And it was something that was in operation up until the 1990s, not that long ago in recent memory, right? And then we did talk about last episode that there are initiatives especially in with Algoma University, where they recognize what this place was. And there's organizations such as SASA, the Aboriginal Students Union, and the various different Shingwalk residential school organizations that operate and as we said, not reconciliation with air quotes, but real reconciliation. Oh, but one of my points would be that, someone who went through the history program there, and then a lot of the other social studies programs, is that something that's what happened there, and the connection that this place has, and the meaning that place and those buildings and what happened there has with the various different people who might come to that university. That's kind of drilled into us in the social studies, and it's not into the other disciplines that happen to go to the school and to even the community at large. And so it's one of those disconnects that Canadians have. And I think that mirrors, I think, a lot of the things that the Americans miss in relation to Jim Crow laws and things.
Well, I think you're right about that, and especially like the Civil War and slavery, because I think the South really does try to, I would say, forget, because it's a dark time, and you don't want to be known. I think America especially doesn't like to be known as, the bad guy.
Mm-hmm.
We like to be portrayed as, the hero, the one who swoops in and, wins the war, I guess you could say. And so America really does like to be known as the bad guy. And so I think the South kind of has that idea. But I think, the beautiful thing about history is that by remembering those dark times, you are preventing them, but you're also just showing, hey, this is what we did and it was awful, but we're going to do better. And by remembering this, we are doing better. And we are honoring those who need to be honored.
Right. I think, sorry,
No, go on.
Technical issues. Yeah, I think that's right. And I think something the issue too is that, as much as I will rag on especially Americans and American history 24/7, every possible moment I can.
Oh, I know.
But I think the one thing that is important to remember is that, good in one single good deed and one single bad deed is not the makeup of someone's entire history and genealogy and what makes them who they are. And that, and especially humans, they are complex individuals, and that you cannot show me one person who is ideologically wholly black, wholly white, they are ultimately anything on one issue, is that everybody exists in the gray. And I think part of that is and part of being better is acknowledging, the bad things that we may have done and owning up and at least trying to find a way forward.
Right. And I also want to address the statue argument.
Yeah.
I'm sure you know about this, about
Yes.
the argument of Confederate statues symbolizing, not racism, quote unquote, but the history.
Right.
But I want to address that historically, if you look at the dates of when most of those Confederate statues were erected,
Right.
They were erected not after the Civil War, which is the person or community, whoever, wanted to put that statue in place to but to remember the Civil War, or remember the Confederate hero, whatever. They would have erected those right after the Civil War.
Right.
But if you look at those actual dates of when those statues were erected, they were erected during Jim Crow. They were erected, during long after the Civil War.
Civil rights movement.
Yeah, they were erected just to show African Americans, to remember, where you are, remember race.
To intimidate.
Right. So those statues, they should be torn down because they do not symbolize a history.
Well, they were put up with a malicious intent.
Right.
That's the difference.
Yeah. It was to be malicious. It was to show, you're right, to be intimidating. So I do think that, Confederate statues should be torn down unless, maybe if it is a battleground or something like that, unless it was erected right after the Civil War.
And that's different if it's a historical site.
Right.
And something that I've thought about that might be, it'd be one of those middle of the road solutions that nobody would like. So it probably would never work. But after the fall of communism in Bulgaria, they had a similar situation with all these communist symbols, statues of Lenin and, hammer and sickles everywhere and all that. And there's a bunch of people, there's some people who were against this because they felt repressed and marginalized in the regime. And there's others who had fond memories of the regime. So what they did is they just made a museum and put all statues, everything in said museum. So it's all concentrated in one place. So there's merits and there's downsides to that solution, but
I think that's totally appropriate, though.
Yeah.
And also, I remember when you went to Berlin, and you told me all about it, and you said you showed me the place where Hitler died, and it was just like a plaque. Yeah, the bunker. Yeah. And you can tell it. You're better at telling it.
Okay, so I went to Berlin on a little solo trip, and long story short, I did my own little walking tour of the city, and one of the places I wanted to see was, just because I was near it, was the bunker where Hitler spent his last days during the fall of Berlin. And if you go there, it's literally, they paved it over. It's just a little parking lot, a little unassuming parking lot that you wouldn't even know anything had happened there. And if it wasn't for just a sign, like a small, like I don't want to say like, wasn't a small, but it's just like kind of an average like traffic sign that says, oh, this is where the bunker was, and a little bit of information and a diagram and such. Like it's very Spartan and very bare, I guess you could say. And this was explained to me that it was done fairly intentionally because they didn't want to create, a place for people who would view him as a martyr and as a tragic figure to essentially have a shrine or an altar to him there.
Right. But they kept, something in place where people could at least, know the historical significance. But they did it so appropriately.
But yes, they did it in a way where, again, it doesn't create a shrine or an altar.
Right. Because when you showed me, I remember when you showed me that picture, I was like, that's it? There should be more. And you told me exactly why.
Right.
I definitely think that there is, something to be done about, I don't know.
Statue issue. Now here's to move in a little bit in the other direction. What about, because we actually just had an issue a few days ago in Montreal, where they tore down the statue of our first Prime Minister, Johnny MacDonald. And so we're having issues here with regards to that. It is so it's a little bit different of a conversation when you compare. If you have, when you're talking about Confederate statues, it's a little more clean cut. I wouldn't say it's completely clean cut, but it's a little more clean cut in the area where these people have say that they have stood for a wrong thing, and that they have essentially created a crime against the United States of America. Difference is that Johnny MacDonald, he was our first prime minister. Like he was the I don't want to say the equivalent to your George Washington, but he was a founding father of our country.
Right.
Okay. But it's also, you can't go without saying, is that he did take hostile actions towards Aboriginals. He would be considered, and again, this is where we get into muddy waters. By today's standards, he would obviously be someone who would be considered racist.
Probably.
Right. So, so this is where it's again, it's a little more muddy waters. Is do you tear down a statue of this who is an important political figure in Canadian history, who, especially when you look at the conservative factions in our country, who would say that, you know, this is someone who should be revered and someone who shouldn't be disgraced in such a way. And then you look at the kind of the more left factions in our country. Well, this is someone who is a racist and someone who did unsavory things. How do you address that? How do you?
I mean, so they tore down the statue.
They tore down the statue. Private citizens took down the statue, and I know the only thing I've seen as far as the government response is that our Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has said he was displeased and with what happened.
They took it down.
They tore it down. Yeah.
Like the government.
No. Private citizens.
Okay, so then your Prime Minister was upset that the private citizens tore it down.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, yeah, that is a good question. Well, because I mean, there's plenty of statues of like Washington and Jefferson, and they had slaves. Right. So, I mean, so that's, you know, very similar. But America's not going to be tearing down those statues.
I remember seeing stories earlier of, people calling to tear down statues of, say, Washington. I remember them. I think they did either tear down or disgrace. There was one Revolutionary War general. I forget his name off the top of my head, but he's the Polish one. Who was, I know, and again, he's got a terrible Polish name, and if I had my Polish friend on the podcast, he would remember immediately. But he was someone who fought not only during the Revolutionary War, but afterwards, too, for the rights of African Americans. Yet his statue was still defaced. And then the thing that got me, again, and this is where I don't know where to come down on this, is that there's people who, I don't know if they were people who leaned right or if they leaned left, but they tore down the statue of Frederick Douglass in Rochester, New York. And they defaced it wasn't quite a statue, but a monument to the 54th Massachusetts Regiment, which was an African-American regiment during the Civil War, which was made up of free slaves. So
that's not good.
No, exactly. So
that's not good. I mean, going back to your situation though, that is very hard. I don't really know anything about your first prime minister, but was it just like a lot of outwardly, like?
I'm not 100%, because to be honest, like I only know kind of I haven't looked into it as much as I should have. It's just kind of the outward, okay, he was the first prime minister. He was involved with some shady stuff. He was the first prime minister also to not serve consecutive terms. There was a train scandal that I'm trying to remember. I can't remember off the top of my head. Yeah. To do with the rail line. This government was involved. So there was another, the second prime minister was something else, but he came back in as the third term.
Because I mean, I know President Andrew Jackson, he's on, I think it's the $5 bill. I think it's the $5 bill.
No, there's
the 20.
More. What? Andrew?
20?
Oh, he's on the 20. Yeah, I think.
He's on the 20. So he's on the 20, and I mean, he initiated the Trail of Tears.
Right.
And I honestly don't think his picture should be on there. I think it should be, like Harriet Tubman, or I think it should be a different leader, and not just Andrew Jackson. So I mean, I think it is still important that you remember the history. That you can't take away the fact that he was the first prime minister.
No.
I mean, so I think maybe also even keeping that statue, but also saying like he did, like making another plaque saying he did all these terrible things.
Right.
So people can at least see, both sides.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's another problem we have too, is that we have people who, again, kind of more on the right, and they see this as not a justified action. So this just gets them more enraged, and it just becomes this never-ending cycle of this never-ending vicious cycle, where one side commits what's perceived as a slight, and then the other one commits one in retaliation, and it's not de-escalating. I think that's again a problem that's happening right now in both our countries, where things are just building up to this pressure point. Because that's one of my biggest fears right now. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure. Because that's one of my biggest fears for your country in particular right now, is your election coming up.
Oh.
And I honestly, like, it seems more and more likely to me that a civil war might occur. Like, it's just.
I mean, if you had asked me a month ago with George Floyd, I would have been like, yeah, I think it might happen now for a civil war. I don't think it's gonna happen right now.
No, I think. Okay, my specific scenario of what I think is gonna happen for your second American Civil War is that I think come November, Biden will win the election, but by a very slim margin, and then Trump will declare the election as invalid, whether it's due to fraud or improper vote. He'll use a plethora of reasons, none of them really sensical, and most of them that he's been trying to fabricate starting months ago, and he's continuing to fabricate. And he'll use that as a reason to stay occupied in the office. And it will come to a confrontation if whether he tries to forcibly stay in there, or someone tries to forcibly remove him, like with military action. That's what I see happening.
Oh, I mean, I guess I could see that.
You say that so casually, like, oh yeah, that could happen.
I mean, you're not the first person that has told me that they think that Trump is either gonna have to be forcibly removed or not. But so it's, I don't know. We'll see after November and January how it kind of goes, I guess.
Right.
I don't know. I'm not caught up on my election news.
No? Oh, God. I did a terrible thing. I decided to watch the last 2 days of the RNC.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, it was... It was... What?
Was it brutal?
Oh, yeah, it was really brutal. It flipped... The speeches flipped between either Trump is so great, all these great things, and they tended to be, fluff pieces and not really of much substance, because there hasn't been much he's really done. Or they're attributing other things other people have done to him. Or they spelt doom and gloom if Biden were to get in, and
right.
All these terrible things, what would happen to the country. And no more cows. Biden's going to outlaw cows. And
what?
no more. Biden's going to outlaw cows and gas vehicles. No more cows, no more cars.
Why cows?
Because apparently he wants to turn everything into a vegan utopia where everyone has to be a vegan.
Really?
Yep.
That's new.
I'm going to ship your cows elsewhere.
My grandpa has cows.
Nope, not anymore.
Nope.
January 21st, if Biden gets his way, no more cows. Government's going to come by. Take away your cows.
That would be upsetting. Honestly.
I don't know. According to the RNC, at least. That's
how that's going to go.
Yeah.
Sure, okay.
Yeah.
Guess we'll find out on January 21st.
Yeah.
But, I don't know. I still need to vote. So.
Yeah.
Whenever that happens, I guess.
Yeah.
Like I said, I'm not caught up on that 100%.
No?
No.
No.
I don't know. It's such a half.
Yeah.
especially when you don't really like anyone that's, running.
Right. Yeah. That's
Like,
that's the problem we're having too. Is that there's just no likable candidates anymore, which is a real bummer.
I don't know. And then when you like them, then they get into office, and it's just like, I don't like you anymore.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And then they go do that. Was, I think, a big upset with Trudeau, is that there's a lot of people who voted for him in his first term as prime minister that there's a few issues. I know there's a lot of people in my circle that wanted him to push through electoral reform, especially we have a system what's called first past the post. So because we have more than two parties that can, feasibly run in, multiple elections or in what we call ridings, you just have to sort of get a simple majority to gain a seat. So say there's four parties running in a particular riding. If my party gets 40%, your party gets 20, another party gets 15, and then the last party gets 5. I win the seat because I got the most votes. But it doesn't take into consideration that 60% of voters essentially voted against me.
Okay.
Right?
Right.
So they wanted to do proportional representation where it would kind of even out, and where you would vote, say, on say if on a federal level or a larger level, if the Liberal Party got 40% of the vote, then they'd only get 40% of the seats, and so on and so forth.
That makes sense.
Right. So, because we've had a lot of problems where, because our three main parties are the Liberals, which are kind of our center-left party, the Conservatives, which is the right, and then the NDP, which is our I use the term left, quote unquote. What happens is kind of the left vote gets split between the NDP and the Liberals, and then the Conservatives tend to be, more often than not, the party ending up winning, by that, that same sort of, they get 40, the Liberals get 20, the NDP gets 15, and then all the other parties get 5, and, say a particular riding. That's been somewhat of a problem, especially depending on which province you're in and what have you. But again, that it does change from province to province.
At least you have more than two parties.
What? Yeah, and that is one thing that's better, is that we have choice. And I think something that we talked about yesterday is that even though the NDP haven't, at least in the East, I don't think they've formed a provincial government. I know they formed provincial governments out in the West, and they've never formed a federal government. They are the proponents of some of our, what you would say are more left policies, like our free healthcare and stuff like that. So even though they haven't retained power, they are someone who at least keep, especially if, say, God forbid, the Conservatives get into power, there's someone who will keep them in check. Unlike your system, where the Democrats are essentially helpless.
Yeah.
Facing the Republicans. So.
But I will say, and honestly, I don't know if this is because of Trump or not, but one good thing that has affected me personally, that's been good, the student loans. Yeah. Because of COVID.
Yeah.
Trump, quote unquote, or the government, whatever, said that they are waiving, late fees and payments, so I don't have to make a payment, and I have 0% interest until January 1st.
Okay, they did that for us too, but indefinitely. So.
Oh yeah, okay. Well, good for you.
At least as far as I know, it's indefinite. Oh.
Mine's until, I think, January. It was supposed to be September 1st.
Yeah.
And so, August 31st, made my payment, and then I got the email the next day.
Nice.
January 1st. So that's great. That's one good thing that's affected me.
Right, yeah.
Other than that, I don't know anything else that's good.
I don't know.
I think we pretty much hit our topics.
Yeah.
And even, address some other issues that I think were good.
Yeah, we did. Pretty good. Just, geez, that's a lot of heavy.
It is. It is
Yeah.
heavy. And I mean, we really, just have to go from here, I guess, and keep doing our best to remember and do better.
Right.
That's
How
what
about, have you heard anybody talk about our border situation? Like our border in particular?
I think I've seen like one thing.
Oh, really?
I can't remember. Aren't you guys like mad at us?
Yes, we are. We definitely, because of all your COVID cases, most of us are hoping and praying that the border will stay closed indefinitely. And then there's a lot of talk that that Trump's government wants to reopen it. And we're fighting tooth and nail to keep it closed, essentially.
I mean, it's your border too, so even if Trump wants to open it, can't you just say no?
Yeah, essentially. That's pretty much what it's going on. But just to not piss them off too much, we're just kind of doing these temporary closures where we'll say, oh, we'll revisit it in 3 months. And then 3 months comes, and then we just say, 3 months from now, just to not make it seem like we're closing it indefinitely. But I don't think there's many people who would be in favor, at least right now, of just keeping it closed indefinitely until, you guys actually sort out the problem. So
with COVID, or just
COVID at least, let's say.
Let's start
with COVID. We would like it if you fixed everything, but
yeah, I mean, who even knows when COVID's gonna?
And that's the other thing too, is that at least here, are things ever going to go back to normal? No, I don't think so. But things are like they're pretty good now. Like there's nothing. It's nowhere near as crazy it was as when it first began. And is a return of normalcy here. Just from what we see on the news, like it just looks absolutely crazy. Like nothing looks anything approaching normal over there, and like we want to keep it close because we've at least got a handle on what we've got, and we don't need that of one American who has it, who crosses over and decides to spread it all out through, say, downtown Toronto and just reignite it.
I mean, my roommates are students at the university, and I think they just told me that the university has 1,000 cases.
Really?
Yeah, and they've been open. It's been 3 weeks now.
Yeah. Like, so, I'm not sure about Ottawa, where I am right now, the exact number of cases, but I know back in the Sioux, it's like I don't think the total cases cracked like 100. And that's like a town of 70-ish thousand.
I mean, the cases here have been like tripling.
Right.
Like it was like 78, and then it was 300 something, and then I think I saw it was 600, and then now it's 1,000.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, granted, I guess I should say, the university is probably 20,000.
Okay, but still, like that, those are large numbers, especially for that small of a, Yeah, that was good talk.
I think it was good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, next week or something, you'll have to do a lighter topic.
We'll see. I've already got someone lined up for next week, so I'm not quite. Again, I'm not 100% sure what we're talking about, but we'll see.
Fun. Spontaneous. That's more fun.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I guess that's it for this week. Tune in next week, and we'll see you next time.